So I'm going to do a video now. I only have about 5 minutes before dinner, and I want to sort of do a retrospective of where we're at now and sort of where we need to go. One thing is we need to bring the thread pool back into play. The main thing for the thread pool, after looking at it, is in the worker here, this very last unwrap. Whenever I figured out what's going on, whenever the supplier of code here goes away, where the worker gets shut down, or the queue, the sender side of the MPSC queue shuts down, this is going to fail, and the error value that is returned basically says that there are no more senders. You can see that on receive. Receive error is going to be, well, I don't know. Oh, yeah, here we go. Here's receive error, which is, well, it's a struct here. Anyway, it's going to say that the caller shut down. So this should be the only thing that we have to fix in this, although I haven't done a big walkthrough of this. But it looks relatively correct. One might use a already supplied thread pool from crates. There are certainly ones out there, so it's probably better to use that. But you know, it's always good to learn how to write it ourselves. So if we look at handler, no. Look at, let me see where our server code here. The main thing that we adjusted here is the read and parse request, which is able to, well, it's not quite doing this right. And But we're using generics now, so that we can enable testing and provide as an interface to callers something that is generic, that doesn't require a very specific instance of a type like TCP stream or something like that. So what I want to do is sort of say, well, what if we look at, say, parse request? Parse request uses build, and some of this I'm looking ahead to see where do we want to look at for sort of taking the next step. So I look at build, and build is really new. It uses the build verb, but it's really new because it's not really implementing the builder trait or the builder pattern. So if we're going to be using build, I really expect this to, in the modern way of doing things, at least in the modern and whatever year it is now, 2024, to use the builder trait that has a chain of functions and maybe a finalize that we implemented before. But anyway, this could actually be parse. Maybe parse is a better name. I'm going to change that now. Much better name, because it's not build. So, now we ask the request to parse it instead of us. I don't like any of this. I don't want to generate a new string, and this should always, not always, but this should really be a string reference here. So sort of the fact that we're turning this into owned values. A very common practice for people who are first starting out in Rust to use a lot of clones, to use a lot of owned types when we can pass in references just the same. So we'll look into that. And I'm looking at this. So like lines.first unwrap or basically says, okay, if we don't have a line of something of the header, we're going to assume that it's slash. And that's not accurate. Like if we cannot, if the caller did not provide a valid header, we need to error out and, maybe not even supply a response, but that should be a failure if this. Like I would expect this to be instead of unwrap or to use let me move my mouse there. Let me just split this into lines to be okay or else, and then we're going to return an anyhow. No request first line found. And the question mark goes here so we can continue on and not actually do that. That's probably what we want. And testing is certainly going to fix this. Because, we want to be able to parse a request. And we want to be able to give it like no lines, and it's going to error out. And additionally, like we can turn this into not be a reference. There's any number of generics that we can put in play here. This should really be an into iter. Let me just hint at what maybe we're going to do. So lines is really going to be, the type of that is going to be an impl into iter of something that impl as ref stir. That's going to be closer to what the type of this is going to be, in order to just make this be as generic as we possibly can make it. Additionally, no, I was going to try to see if we can bubble this up to not have like owned types here, but I think this is mostly fine. I'm going to deal with that. But yeah, I like this perhaps a little bit better. Line stuff. Hold on. Build. Yeah. I was just trying to correct some of the errors. This is failing. I'm going to leave this in play because, like, as I come back to it tomorrow to sort of continue this adventure, we're going to sort of revisit this. I might say let first line equal lines.first, okay or else. There we go. So now if you look at the type, like this is now a reference to a string. And that's kind of what we want here. And then build is basically going to say we're going to build this off of the first line. And build can probably fail, right? Oh, it's not build, it's parse now. Sort of apologize. I'm implementing this now, but request line. So, we're not going to do unwrap or get. like the caller has to provide a valid request line, and it's going to be get and something, and probably the method. I don't know if it has to be capitalized. Maybe it does. I think most web servers allow for lowercase or no case. So I'm trying to look. I'm trying not to. Let me just change that so the previous one will compile, right? First line is complaining about the question mark. But yeah, like this should fail. I'm going to add the question mark because I want it to fail. Any of these things that have the unwrap or should certainly, most certainly, be bad. Protocols certainly, we can accept different types of versions. And I get it that this was implemented to try to solve a very specific thing, and not trying to be generic. But we need to we're going to start implementing tests for testing parsing of a request, and we need to have this properly error. So any verb that's not what is it, get, put, post, and delete. I think those are the three verbs. Any of those should error out, and we can test against that. You must have a URI. Probably needs to start with slash. I don't know what the URI parsing thing is. We could certainly use a URI library to do this, but we're going to work with what we have here, and that'll be better. And I'm trying to think if I want to then say, well, what if like this is constructing strings, and we should be able to use string references so that our request here is not holding owned strings, but it's holding references to strings. And that's going to be a huge can of worms that we're going to open as we then deal with lifetimes, because if this is holding owned references to data that was passed in from the header, then the ownership of that data needs to be able to persist throughout this entire lifetime of generating the lines, which means that in the result type that we return here, we have to own the entire header here. And I think I'm going to go down that. It's going to be ugly, but probably a really, really, really good tutorial on references and ownership and sort of managing the lifetimes of that. And to be honest, I might fail this, but it's certainly useful to go down that road, because like the lines that we read in here were read from the network and can persist forever, and we don't have to make copies of everything in there. Now we could also throw away the entire header, but usually in web server applications like this, it owns the entire header throughout the lifetime of the process, so that handlers have access to that header. So it's worth going into. So we're getting deeper and deeper into complexities of Rust, but it's going to be a good ride. So let's really interested in part 4 of this code review.